Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we have an extremely special interview. Here is the former community manager of LittleBigPlanet, Stephen Isbell. So, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, as I say, I've been working, or I was working as a community manager for LittleBigPlanet since 2012. So, yeah, so I was on the franchise for a good 12 years, all the way from, well, I pretty much worked on every title, but I sort of came in towards the tail end of LittleBigPlanet 2's lifespan before we were moving on to, well, PS Vita, then karting, LBP 3, and then Sackboy and Big Adventure. And yeah, was doing that for a long time and just, doing my thing for you guys.
Yeah, that's amazing. We really appreciate you being the community manager for so long, especially after Tom and Spaff. Tom and Spaff were great at the beginning, early days of LittleBigPlanet. They were wonderful community managers, and then of course things shifted, priorities shifted, and you came in, like you said, around 2012, 11, and then from there you were the community manager for almost or over 13 years, I believe.
Yeah, yes. To say, way back in the day, I got into LittleBigPlanet by, well, first as a fan of the games, and then, becoming friends with Spaff, and when I first started, I actually went and joined Media Molecule for 4 or 5 months, working directly with Spaff, Tom, and the rest of the Media Molecule crew as they were sort of doing the handover, as at the time they were, moving on to Tearaway and Dreams.
Yeah, that's amazing. So how did you actually get introduced to LittleBigPlanet as a franchise?
So it was a very simple story. I'd literally just picked up a PlayStation 3 and honestly, I bought it for Grand Theft Auto 4, because that was the big release at the time. But it was just basically a case of me thinking to myself, well, I need to have more than one game to be playing on this thing I'm spending so much money on. Let's have a nosy around and see what I can find. And I just complete happenstance stumbled upon LittleBigPlanet the week it released, even even the day it released, I think. And it just sort of immediately caught my attention because it was it was a platform for building your own platforming games. And I've always been a huge fan of platforming games. I've always been a big fan of sort of the simulation creation games, like your Sims and your SimCity, stuff like that. And I thought, well, you're just basically taking two of my favorite worlds, mashing them together. Let's give it a shot. And as they would normally say, the rest is history at that point. Who knew what that decision on that day on a random shopping trip would lead to? Yeah, so that's essentially what happened. So I picked up the game, I took it home, I played through the story, and I wanted me, I like to 100% get all the collectibles and all of that stuff first. And then it came on to moving to the creation and sharing part of the aspect. And I just loved the fact that I could go straight into the community, and there was already thousands upon thousands of levels for me to check out, all of similar or even, occasionally better quality than the ones that actually came with the game, You get to that point in the game where you sort of think to yourself, like, do I want to move on to something else? Or do I want to commit myself to this? It's like, no, I'm really enjoying myself here. And I want to sort of give something back to the community. But I'll be the first to admit, I am not a level designer. I'm not a level creator. I can critique levels. I can do that, but I can't make them myself. So what can I do that isn't based around level creation? And the answer was simple. What I'd been doing for previous gaming forums I've been a part of, which is like, let's just get involved in this forum community and help people there. So I jumped straight onto the official LittleBigPlanet forums, which is called the LittleBig Workshop forums back in the day. Just started answering people's questions, helping them guide through the game, writing guides on where to find the various costumes, finding levels and highlighting them. And then, so it just escalated from there, just continuing to, rather than creating the content myself, just sort of being like a guide and helping finding the content for other people.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, the history there of how you were sort of hopping between different forum communities prior to LittleBigPlanet really shows that sort of transition, that carry over. Because I feel like if you have experience with something like that prior, you almost sometimes develop attachments with certain communities, and then through those attachments you sort of learn skills that can be generalized, even if they're specific to the community at the time. So I feel like you were very well rounded when you were approaching Little Big Planet as a franchise, and I'm sure over time you saw how people the general trends of how the levels were being published with cool levels and Lucky Dip and everything else that was going on in the community. But before we get to that, that's all the juicy stuff. If you could pick a year that you would describe as maybe being the golden age of Little Big Planet, what is it for you, and what was so special about that time?
Oh, that is a very good question. The golden period. I think it's going to have to be somewhere between in the Little Big Planet 2 era, maybe the mid to end Little Big Planet 2 era, because Little Big Planet 1 was an amazing framework for what it did, and everyone's got so much nostalgia for that game. But I always felt that Little Big Planet 2, because of the advanced gadgets and tools and creation tools that were added, it just allowed the game to just jump up to that whole new level that people couldn't achieve before. Because I mean, in the previous game, I say we all saw like the Little Big calculator level with all the pistons and tags and sensors getting that going, and now you could just microchip it into, well, again, they're very complicated microchips, but at least they didn't take up 90% of your level to actually achieve what you're trying to get the level to achieve. So I would say sometime between the mid to late Little Big Planet 2, where everything had sort of been established. We'd done a few major DLC releases and updates. We'd had water and tractor gel, and I'd say maybe around the DC Comics release, where that was sort of a combination of everything you'd want to sort of expect in a Little Big Planet level. You could jump in, there'd be some amazing new power-ups, some new story. We'd have a bit of fun with some characters, and then once you've done that, you can either make your own version of these levels, or just even take these ideas and just do stuff that we wouldn't even expect you to do, and just surprise us with your own creativity.
Yeah, and now throughout, sort of generally speaking, forwarding in time to say LBP2, around that time of the community, a lot of us, at least early on in the age of LBP2, we noticed the boo button being a thing, and at a certain point it was removed. Do you know why it was removed, and do you think that it was a good decision?
Yes, I've heard a lot of people ask me this question before, but not on a video, so I can talk about it here. So what the issue with the boo button is, it honestly just served no purpose in the end. So in the original game, you had the 5-star rating system, and you were basically fine. It's the same with most review platforms. You either really love something, or you really hate something, or you don't care in the slightest. So you'd play the level and you'd give it a 1-star or a 5-star, or you very rarely were bothered. There's not many people who think this is a middling of the road 3. So moving on to Little Big Planet 2, we stepped away from the 5-star system because it really didn't serve a purpose, because at that point you're only looking at like the 4 and the 5 stars, and let's be honest, there's a lot of what we would call a 3-star level that are still very, very good, because 3-star could still effectively be 79%. It's that kind of crazy weighting. So that was then moved on to a simple yay and boo system. But as we were refining how Little Big Planet sort of sources content to the community, we had some obviously messages from some community members who obviously they pour their hearts and souls into these levels, and then they publish it, and then they start getting like loads of people booing it, and that can just be so disheartening. If you've spent like weeks, months, you could even up to half a year or even more building this level, and then just people come along and boo it, that can be really disheartening and put you off forever. But that wasn't the primary reason we got rid of it. The main reason, say, we got rid of it is it wasn't serving a purpose other than causing upset, because the rating system was looking at essentially how many people played the level and how many people yayed it, liked it. And obviously the more yays it gets compared to the amount of plays, that was a simple enough target for us. As say, if it was getting booed, that was just irrelevant information. So it just was a simple case of, well, let's take it out because it's not serving a purpose other than upsetting people.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think your reason is very similar for Tom and Spaps as well. They were sort of speculating on why it was removed, and they said pretty much the same thing. So it's good to have a confirmation there.
It's
And
literally, yeah, it was causing a bit of upset, but the primary reason, it just wasn't serving any purpose. Like, even, for our handling of how we were sourcing levels and highlighting to community, we found that people building levels was just useless information to us because the yays were telling us what we needed to know.
yeah.
And the criticism is, what do I want to do? We had obviously criticism saying like, oh, what if I really want to, say this is a bad level? It's like, well, then your option is just don't yay it, and that will be simple enough. That will tell us you weren't impressed enough, so fair enough. That's all we need to know.
Yeah, definitely. Now,
and of course, we always left the reviews open. So if you really, really wanted to break down and any positivity or any criticism of the level, you still had that avenue. So it's not like we took away all manners of feedback from you to a creator.
what did you think when you saw the sort of and I'll put it this way, because I mean we all saw it, let's be honest. The emo hair, the emo trend in Little Big Planet 2. What did you think about that? What were your thoughts on it when you saw all these people, dressing up their Sackboys with specialized stickers and, shark teeth hair and all that stuff? What did you think?
Good on them. As I said, it's literally what those tools are there for. If that's what you want to represent yourself, the whole idea of your Sackboy, Sackgirl, Sack person is you could represent yourself however you want to see fit. So, that's the way you want to do it. All it was basically telling us is maybe we needed to add more of those hairstyles into the game, but often it was a case of trying to, find a good way to sort of sneak them in. Not sneak them in, but get them into the game for good reason rather than just, oh, here's a hairstyle pack, So, yeah, it was just, I said, I saw a lot of people doing those hairstyles, and yeah, if that's, me being jealous, I said, my Sackboy never had hair for obvious reasons. But, no, if that's how you want to represent yourself, yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out. That's exactly what those tools are there for.
What are your thoughts on commonly copied levels, such as bomb survivals being spammed and topping hearted lists?
So that's part of the reason we had a revamp during Little Big Planet 3's lifetime, because again, we all can remember the core levels and how the popular levels were the popular levels, and there was just no shift in them whatsoever. And Lucky Dip, again, was just, you were getting completely random stuff. There was no sort of rhyme or reason to what you were getting. So you would find that the only way to find levels sort of in Little Big Planet 2 and early Little Big Planet 3 was via the team picks and trying to build your own network of hearting creators via that, which was a very limited way of finding content. So we had no sort of rules or issues with people like copying levels. At the end of the day, if someone's made their level copyable, go ahead, copy it as much as you like. But that's why when we got to Little Big Planet 3 to the revamp there, and we were bringing sort of the whole community menu revamp that added genres and particularly the recommendations, so that if you weren't interested in bomb survival levels, you could go and look at these genres or in your own recommendations and find something else, because as much as we love bomb survival levels, they're not the only thing we want to play.
What was the selection process for team picks even like, and how is it different from Little Big Planet 2 to Little Big Planet 3?
So team picking was essentially, say, myself going through the community, playing levels, and my general response is, would somebody else enjoy playing this? I know some people sort of had this vision that the team picks had to be like the top of the top, amazing, better than anything Medium Molecule or Sumo could make. It's got to be, if it's not that, it's not worthy of a team pick. But at the end of the day, it was more a case of, would other people enjoy playing this? Which is why I also set on doing a few team picks a week, because you'll always get someone says like, oh, I didn't like this level. It's like, okay, we'll play one of the other two then. That's why we do multiple. You've got something to do. So, the main goal there was to always make sure that, and I said I'd put them on every Friday. You could come back every weekend and there'd always be something new to look at. But in terms of finding the team picks, it was an evolving process, but it essentially, the easiest way for me to get team picks was just the recommendations from you guys on either the forums or on Twitter, just sending them to me and telling me, I played this person's level, I think it's great and I think it's worth checking out. It's like, okay, I'll go and check it out and see what I think. And if I agreed, chances are it could have ended up in the team picks.
What's your greater opinion on the numerous amount of troll levels that were made in the community? I'm sure you remember just as anyone else, specifically in Lucky Dip, the amount of unnamed levels or nivel sin nombre that was published, and you would play it and.
So I think that kind of came from the fact that the very first LittleBigPlanet had a trophy. I think, was it to get like 50 hearts on one of your levels? So
yeah,
that's how the whole Heart for Heart started, and people were just publishing, unnamed level, and can you please heart this? And as much as we want to encourage people sharing, it kind of then has a knock-on effect that, okay, we've now got this community being filled up with blank levels just being hearted for the sake of this trophy. So you'll probably notice in LittleBigPlanet 2 or 3, there were no trophies for hearting levels or sharing levels of that nature, because we realised there's some behaviours you don't want to encourage because, we want people to be publishing something that, they've actually put some time into rather than just trying to get a trophy. And, we'd had complaints saying, like, why are you locking this trophy behind one that is arguably a popularity contest, especially in the cool levels days where, if you didn't get onto the cool levels, your level was going to struggle to get hearts anyway. So, it's not that we had any issues with the heart for heart ecosystem. Again, that was getting around a problem that was introduced by the original creation ecosystem. So, you say the easiest solution there was to let's just make sure we don't do any trophies that encourage people to publish blank levels.
How did and I think you also hinted at this earlier that you had a team, but to be more specific, how did the moderation system work for LBP? Like, was the team outsourced, or was it mostly, in-house at the studio and you were working with them one-on-one?
So the moderation, well, there are multiple moderation teams. They're all Sony in-house ones. So they weren't in the studio for LittleBigPlanet itself, but they were in-house for Sony's own offices, who would cover moderation, not just for LittleBigPlanet, but for all Sony PlayStation games. And as it was, is basically you had the grief report tool, you do your grief report, include your screenshot, include your bit of text to say what the issue was, and it would just essentially get added to their catalogue of grief reports to check through. And then if they found anything offensive, they could just straight away hit a button to moderate the level until either the issue was addressed, or in some cases if a community member reached out to me to look into this issue further, because as I say, the moderation team, very helpful, always did their goal of removing any offensive content, but sometimes there is nuance, and a community member could reach out to me to look into something, and I would only really come in once something had already been moderated, and I could then access the logs myself to see what actually was moderated, jump into the game personally and see in context, is this actually an issue?
So in LBP 1, you had DLC editors that, it would switch your costume, but it would actually stay on your character until you restarted the game. So it would actually remain somewhat permanent in a way. You could go to your pod and then you could. What are your thoughts on that?
Really, not something I personally had an issue with. I think, again, it might have been something that was addressed by the time I was brought on board. I think later on it might have been updated so that the game was more frequently checking, possibly, I think, when you jump to your pods, what DLC keys you actually owned, and would remove anything that you weren't supposed to own.
So, right before LittleBigPlanet was delisted, you handed out, obviously a bunch of rare item codes. There's the Crown, Beta Rares, LBP Cap. How were you given these codes exactly?
So a lot of them I've been sitting on for years. Whenever I had like either the Crowns or the LittleBigPlanet Cap or anything else I had my hands on, it wasn't just a case of I'd reach out to PlayStation Store and say, can I have one Crown code, please? I would say, can I have a batch of Crown codes? And, I'd often receive like 200, 300, 400. Now, with an item such as a Crown, we're giving one away, once a month, a couple of months, if you're lucky. So it just came to the, we're getting to the end of the service, and I was just sitting upon hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of these codes still. That, maybe it's just me being too stingy through the years, but it got, it's essentially a case of, well, it's either use them or lose them. I either get redeemed now or they get chucked in the bin. And obviously throughout the 10 plus years I've been working on the franchise, I've had so many people asking me for the crown or the cap or the other DLC that we were giving out over the years, and it's a case of, well, let's go out with a bang. If you want a code, I turned it into various games and activities, didn't I, to encourage people to participate. So that people could have like one last month of fun before we shut the server down.
Do you still play LittleBigPlanet personally yourself?
I play Sackboy Big Adventure. I've not played LittleBigPlanet myself recently. I'll be honest, because I've played it a lot over the years. I should possibly give it another boot up and go through the story one more time, but I haven't played it recently.
Yeah, Sackboy Big Adventure was an interesting spin-off, to the mainline LittleBigPlanet series. What are your thoughts on that game? Did you like it a lot when it first released? Did you, seems like you like it quite a bit because you've still played occasionally, but what were your initial thoughts when the game first released, and how was it, for you in dealing with the community on that game?
So that was one of the very first things we decided, and I hope it came across, but we obviously understood that LittleBigPlanet was a very creative franchise, and we knew that Sackboy Big Adventure, we were treating it as a mainline title, not as a spin-off, but it was not a LittleBigPlanet game. Hence, we removed LittleBigPlanet from the title because we didn't want to give people the impression you're going to get the same creative toolset you would get from a LittleBigPlanet game. But for that reason, we also realized there would be a sector of community that just, would want to stay with the creativity of LittleBigPlanet. So we sort of went into this phase of dual support for both Sackboy Big Adventure and LittleBigPlanet 3, rather than, because normally when you'd release a new game, you would just, move on from the previous one. Yeah, so we did from 1 to 2 to 2 to 3. But when it came to 3 to Sackboy Big Adventure, we thought, no, we've got too much of a community here who's invested in LittleBigPlanet 3, who still want to use the creative tools. And in itself, LittleBigPlanet 3 is a very different experience to Sackboy Big Adventure. So let's just keep them both running. And, we can have our Sackboy Big Adventure community and we can have our LittleBigPlanet 3 community. And, I'm sure there's lots of crossover there, but we want to keep them both going.
Yeah. What was the most impressive level you've ever seen on LittleBigPlanet?
Most impressive? It's always going to be those ones that just, when it looks like you're playing like some 2D animation or 3D first-person shooter or anything that just isn't LittleBigPlanet in the slightest. If you can master the game so well it doesn't even look like LittleBigPlanet and Sackboy to myself, you've done a very good job there, and those ones always impress me.
So, Steve Big Guns, hint, maybe?
Yes, certainly, plenty of his levels. But so many creators over the years were just creating stuff that said, I think we even maybe did a genre for it, for like the arcade games that were just like, no, this is not a Sackboy game. This is its own thing. Come here and play different games.
Do you miss, a lot of the, I would say, major, people in the community that you might have interacted with, and, even the people at Sumo and Media Molecule?
Oh, certainly. It's weird to say miss because I say I'm still on social media and I'm still getting messaged regularly by those very same people who are, playing their own games. I think that's what's great about, gaming communities is they're not always just focused on one community, on one game. You'll often find there are overlapping interests and you could play another game that people are interested in. So, certainly, I'll miss engaging with the LittleBigPlanet community on a professional basis, but it still always brings a smile to my face whenever I load up any sort of social media, YouTube, etc., and just sort of see people still sharing their love for LittleBigPlanet and Sackboy.
Speaking of kind of like other genres and tangents, would you like to share your interest in Final Fantasy in those games?
It's my feeble attempt to talk about anything apart from Sackboy and LittleBigPlanet on my accounts. I say Final Fantasy is one of my. Final Fantasy 7 is my. This is going to be the most shocking thing to a lot of people. That 7 is actually my favorite game of all time. So I hold a very special place in my heart for that one. Which people might have noticed if they ever saw my Sackboy in game. Always had that Buster Sword. As soon as that Final Fantasy 7 costume pack releases, like I am never letting go of this Buster Sword. But yeah, it's just one of those. obviously people always saw me online as the Little Big Planet guy, and once I'd sort of stepped away from Little Big Planet, it's like, okay, let's now start talking about some other games I like playing, just see where we have those shared interests.
Now, I do want to see if you would be able to tell us anything about LittleBigPlanet Hub by any chance.
So I assume you're going to ask what happened to LittleBigPlanet Hub is going to be the question, I imagine.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And so basically the idea was to combine sort of LBP into like a hub where you'd be able to get sort of so rather than having to jump straight into a $60 fresh purchase, you could sort of jump in, get the most basic of tools, and then sort of piecemeal purchase the items that you wanted to build with. But honestly, the real reason that Hub ended up getting dropped is purely because there was no good way of launching Hub without it conflicting with LBP 1, 2, and 3. And when I say conflict, it basically fracture the community into, okay, here's the people who've got Little Planet 3 and all the access to all the content here, and here's the people who've got Hub and the access to the content here. And just the decision was made is we don't want to be splitting this community in half. So, we'd already done most of the work on 3. Hub was, closed down very early in its creation, that we just decided to put all of our efforts into Little Planet 3 instead, and make sure the community could have basically one place they could all call home rather than 2.
What are your thoughts on the modern quote-unquote LittleBigPlanet community, such as its Discord servers as opposed to the old forums?
So yeah, I say it's funny when I started talking earlier in the interview, sort of saying that I got in via forums, and most people will be probably asking now, what's a forum? Because everyone's on social media and Discord these days. And it's just great to see that there are still people with this passion for the game, the franchise. When we were closing down the servers, there was a lot of questions of like, what's going to happen to this community, and I was the one to sort of try and reassure the remaining development team, like, we've got creators who make like movies and soundtracks and that, and they've still got an avenue to do it. In fact, they're probably better off publishing on your likes of YouTube and SoundCloud, because more people will see their content there than they would have ever seen on Little Big Planet itself. So there's certainly, aspects of the community that can still thrive very strongly, even with the servers no longer available.
Yeah, and speaking of the forums, is there anything you can tell us about why LBP.me got shut down?
I honestly think it just became outdated and wasn't really serving a great purpose out of what could be achieved in game. I think once we got the recommendations and the genres in, really not much more you could do with LBP.me, because the problem with LBP.me is, as a platform, it was only really benefiting the people who already knew how to promote themselves in game. It wasn't, for anyone else, it was just giving them a blank page that they didn't really know how to update or manage. If we were to do it again, possibly we'd look into another website, but have a better onboarding process so that, the community can use it more actively. But for the most part, it was just sort of an auto-generated website that really wasn't benefiting those we were hoping it would benefit the most.
I do want to ask about LittleBigPlanet.com. Do you know why it shut down and why it redirected you to the LittleBigPlanet 3 store page?
The main reason there would have been no more news articles or DLC items added to the catalogue, so it just, again, it served its purpose. And at that point, it was only going to be information to people that already knew the information rather than newcomers. Because if a newcomer went to LittleBigPlanet.com, they would just be bombarded with mostly DLC releases and stuff that wasn't really relevant to them. And so it just became more important to think that, well, if someone types into a search engine, Little Big Planet, goes on the website, and they can actually learn about the game itself rather than, sort of what's just happened in the last couple of months. And even then, the stuff happening in a couple of months was more sort of a product release state rather than a community state. What
was it like managing the social media accounts and stuff like that?
So obviously the most obviously would be showing the team, I was doing the team picks, and I was regularly sending sort of emails and the messages to the rest of the team being like, okay, here's this great stuff I've shared in game, and I think you guys will want to see this as well because it's amazing. So I was often sharing creations with them as we were ramping up to LittleBigPlanet 3's release, and we were looking for level designers. I was obviously recommending people from the community. It's like, this is someone we might want to get in touch with ourselves because they've got a talent here that might be useful to us on upcoming projects. Otherwise, my day-to-day was managing the LittleBigPlanet.com website and the social media, engaging with you guys. And it was what you guys were doing was feeding what I was then giving back to the rest of the team. Be it bug reports, issues being raised, or even if it's just your creations, either in-game levels or even say just artwork or films or anything being released online, and showing how much you love Sackboy and LittleBigPlanet.
What sort of aspects of telemetry were you sort of able to analyze and see? I know David Dino hinted at being able to have like a heat map view of where players were most commonly dying in levels and things like that. So what can you tell us about that and any other telemetry data?
Yeah, so obviously the most important one there, you probably hinted at, was the heat map of where people were dying, and you don't really understand how people engage with a game until you release it, and then we can all remember like those famous pits in LittleBigPlanet 1 that would teach you like how to pop your Sackboy and come into a checkpoint, and how many players would actually then just like get stuck there and not realize that's how you're supposed to progress past that area. In terms of other telemetry, it was mostly just focusing on what tools and assets were most being used and what costumes were most commonly being worn.
What was your relationship like with, David Dino in particular? What was it like working with him?
As he said, we were pretty much sitting next to each other most of the time. We had two very separate roles, but I think again it was mostly, he was sharing his insights into the telemetry. He was sort of doing the analytics, and I was doing the practical. I think is the best way to do it. He could sort of tell me what the data was saying, and I would be able to tell him, what the community themselves were showing me. There was sort of a collaborative effort of two different ways of engaging with the community.
Talking about sort of like on the community and stuff like that, there were some levels giving out glitched costumes on their Earths, like the quilted skin, the scuba costume, and the skeleton skin. Mm-hmm. What do you think about these, about glitches in the game in general, and did you have any favorites in particular?
So I think I mentioned before that with glitches, it generally came down to as long as it didn't have a negative impact on the rest of the community, didn't have an issue with it. So if anyone wanted to dress up in the scuba costume or the glowing skeleton costume, I think even I at one point published the glowing skeleton costume on my planet before joining LittleBigPlanet myself. We had absolutely no issue with it. Going back to telemetry, we would obviously get data if there were any specific levels that were causing players' games to crash regularly, and we could look into that, and if anything in there was causing problems, we might have to do a removal just purely for the safety for the rest of the community so that they don't run into this crashing issue.
Is modded content different for you? Do you think people modifying the game to add in custom costumes maybe was a bit different?
Yeah, so that was treated differently. So the key difference is with the glitch content, you were basically manipulating stuff that we'd put into the game ourselves and had tested and made sure was okay and wouldn't cause any issues. The problem with the modded content is obviously that was totally untested. And if LittleBigPlanet was just like a solo endeavor where you only played in your own environment, we wouldn't have an issue with it. To give you an example, people were modding stuff into Sackboy Big Adventure. We really didn't have an issue with it happening in Sackboy Big Adventure because you were just basically playing with yourself and your friends in like a very encapsulated environment. But obviously, once you got to LittleBigPlanet, you're talking a more global community and you're actually sharing content. And if you share something that's going to cause problems, and when I say problem, I mean like literally causing the game to glitch out, crash, cause issues of that nature for other players, then we start running into issues. So it's not that we didn't want to have modded content, it was just more for the safety of the community. We just couldn't have it in LittleBigPlanet, But as I said, not wanting to discourage it completely, that's why we kind of had no issue with Sackboy Big Adventure, because, anything you do in Sackboy Big Adventure, it's only really impacting your own experience.
Do you know how people were selected for LittleBigPlanet 3's beta?
So I believe I'm having to do this from memory. I believe Sony had their own MVP beta program they were using at the time. So they were the from the Sony side of things, at least on the MVP program, we had a bunch of beta testers there. But then on our side, it was just me handpicking people out from the community. And when I say handpicking, I mean it was a good hundreds or so people I think I picked out in the end. I think a lot of it would also not just been handpicking out, but just going through the team picks. And if you were team picked, there was a chance you would have got an invite as well, just because we had the data to say, yep, this person knows how to create. Let's get them on board.
Interesting. Did you ever play any LittleBigPlanet beta other than 3? Did you ever play the water beta, for example, the earlier betas?
So as I said, I jumped into the community within the first week, and I was there all the way. I not only was I in the betas, but I was being invited to the game jams for the various tools that Media Molecule were doing before I even joined LittleBigPlanet myself. So I would have been there for the LittleBigPlanet 2 game jam, the water game jam. I think they did one for the move. And I think my first official game jam myself was LittleBigPlanet PS Vita. But no, I certainly was involved in all of the game jams and betas for the games throughout all of LBP1's history. Other than the very first LBP1 beta, I'll be brutally honest, that was the only one I wasn't involved with.
So if you could change, this is a difficult question, but if you could change something about LittleBigPlanet, what would it be?
You say you're working for a game long enough, you know what you would want to change. We know better than what the players know what they'd like to change. I mean, I can give you multiple answers. I think the first one I could give you would be, it's a very, very simple thing, but a title screen before you hit the pod computer. And this is purely a personal thing that, as much as I love LittleBigPlanet's customization, your pod computer and your pod was the first main menu you encounter when you start up the game.
Yeah.
Now, going back to our discussion earlier about, modded content or glitch content, some of that stuff could be brought into pods. And if that contaminated your pod, it could really just wreck your game and make it unresolvable. So if I could have done anything, I think I would have had a previous title screen that would have allowed you to reset your pod and everything back to the bare minimum before you even enter, and that would have solved so many problems with players encountering issues trying to load up the game.
Items had actually leaked on the store for multiple consecutive years, such as the beta rares on the LittleBigPlanet Vita store. Did you know about this happening, and do you know why those leaks happened?
A simple human error. As LittleBigPlanet went on, we ended up with hundreds upon hundreds of costumes and creator packs, and to the store team, there's not a big sign next to any particular item sort of saying this is a really, really special item, treat this differently to all the other items. To the store team, it would just look like another costume, the launch spacesuit or the week 1 t-shirts or whatever. There was no sort of signifier next to them to sort of say this is a rare or this is a special. It just, to them, it was another product. And because of LittleBigPlanet's backwards compatibility between games, and we were always bringing the DLC forwards, I think they would have essentially got a message saying make all of this DLC compatible between LittleBigPlanet 2 and LittleBigPlanet 3, or LittleBigPlanet 2 and Carton/PS Vita. And tick of a box, they said, okay, yep, we'll make them all available in the game, and they did. So at the end of the day, I think it's just human error with the store team doing exactly what they were told.
Now, about the community on LittleBigPlanet karting, why was the cool levels section frozen, never updated, and why did it stay the same for the entirety of LBP karting's cycle of being online?
Cool, you are jumping back over a decade at this point, but if I think from memory, it's purely because it was managed by a single person, and I think when that single person left the team, that feature stopped working. It wasn't an automated system, it was a manual system that just wasn't being maintained.
That is crazy. A single person was managing that team. What are your thoughts on the PS Plus requirement for multiplayer on the PS4?
Well, again, that was one of those issues that kind of divided the community somewhat, because you say you needed to have PS Plus to be able to play online in the community, and we were sort of in a fortunate situation where LBP3 was still available on PS3. So very often I would just recommend to people, if this is a genuine blocker for you, just pick up the PS3 version. It will work identical.
Sackboy Big Adventure had a lot of DLCs, but surprisingly they were sort of all free. Is there any reason for that decision, whereas LBP ones cost money?
Yeah, so funny enough, that goes back to what I was literally just saying about parents and children and gaming.
Yeah.
It was one of those, when we first started doing DLC for LittleBigPlanet, and we're talking, 10, 12 years ago, it was a very different marketplace. And, we were putting out costumes because it was a fun idea, but then we get the community asking for more costumes. And then we started doing licensed costumes. And obviously we had to raise the price on the licensed costumes purely on our end to pay for the license. That was the only reason they were slightly more expensive. But we were just falling down this rabbit hole of, as time went on, we were getting more and more costumes, and it was getting quite expensive to get into the game. And it was only really being done at that point historically that we couldn't halfway through LittleBigPlanet suddenly decide, okay, we're paying all these licenses, all these costumes, but all the ones going forward are now free. So we kind of had to see it through to the end of LittleBigPlanet 3's DLC plans. But once we moved on to Sackboy Big Adventure, knowing, we're aiming at a new audience, we're aiming at, it's a family game aimed at all ages. We just didn't want to be repeating the same steps of being like, okay, you've got this game, but now we're going to constantly be promoting and selling DLC costumes when we could be doing them, just giving them for free. And they was baked into our system that, the DLC plan was basically we were going to make these costumes that would release throughout its lifespan.
What was your role specifically with LittleBigPlanet PSP's servers, and do you know why it was shut down? Why they were shut down a little bit earlier than the mainline ones?
So again, PSP I would come into when it was already an active title. My role there would have been very similar to what it was here. I forget what they were called, but it had a Team Pix equivalent, didn't it? Community Pix, they might have called it, or something. So I did the last of those, I believe. But it was much like it was with free PS Vita and karting that I had my admin tool that would allow me to do the level picking, the moderation, and as for the reason it got shut down, again, I think it just got to a point where the numbers dwindled that we just couldn't justify keeping it open any longer.
Would you say LBP3 was maybe rushed by Sony? And if so, did this cause any problems or things to not be added into the game?
So I wouldn't say it's rushed. It had a long development period. I just think the main issue was, obviously, we're stepping away from Media Molecule. So there was a lot of pressure to try and sort of expand on the game and make it greater than the sum of its parts. So we had this big vision of sort of make a great big adventure game, and it'd be like a Metroidvania adventure game, but we were also building it off of the old LBP 1 and 2 systems. So, and I just think the scope of the game was far larger than the game engine itself at that time could handle. So it just got scaled down into what ended up being LittleBigPlanet 3 itself.
So Sackboy Big Adventure is notoriously a very difficult game to complete 100%. Did you ever fully complete it?
Yes, I did. It's always been one of my sort of unwritten rules for the games that I work on, is that I will complete and platinum 100% the game myself, purely so that when community come to me raising any issues, I know firsthand what they've had to experience to get to complete the game. And obviously opinions are divided. I could maybe agree somewhat because I was the one receiving the complaints regularly from, should we say, younger players and parents. It was maybe a little too difficult towards the end. I personally would have maybe toned it down a little, but again, why have challenge levels if they're not challenging?
Well, I suppose my last question here, this isn't a twofold one, it's just one. And it's gotta be asked. And that is, which is which is better, Coke or Pepsi?
Okay, well, I'm gonna say Coke. because no one has ever gone into a restaurant, asked for Pepsi, and someone turned around and said, "I'm sorry, we've only got Coke."
That's so true. That's so true. All right, everyone. Well, that was Stephen Isbell, former community manager of pretty much all the Little Big Planet games and Sackboy: A Big Adventure. It has been an absolute honor having you on for an interview, one that I'm sure no one saw coming, and it's going to genuinely change the community forever. So we are very thankful that you took the time with us to talk about all the many obscurities of Little Big Planet, the community, and everything in between and everything beyond. And ultimately, as yourself and as I am, we're all very excited to see where Little Big Planet continues to head over these next few years and what PlayStation decides to do with it. And maybe if Media Molecule, Sumo, or possibly even another studio, maybe Tarsier, Cambridge, whatever else crops up out there in the great wide world decides to pick it up again and keep the train running. So to all of you out there, make sure to keep following us. We'll keep posting interviews over these next few weeks, and it's going to be a wonderful time to see what you all think about our sort of slightly new format that we've devised. And of course, the one thing I would leave for you all out there is to keep Little Big Planet in your hearts. All right, we'll catch you next time. Peace!